for the opportunity to present. Please, can you hear me? I can hear you. I can hear you, but if you can hear me, that's fine.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, that's fine. Thank you. So I'm presenting on blockchain technology and supply chain sustainability, limiting to the cocoa supply chain. And we are going to look at some of the carbon emission issues, since that is the focus of this webinar. Then we zero in into trust and blockchain, whether or not blockchain could, the farmers or the participants in the cocoa supply chain, trust blockchain to resolve some of these carbon emission issues and the other social issues in the global cocoa supply chain. Before that, I want to show you a picture of the cocoa. Most of you have not seen cocoa before. This is the cocoa plant, and when you break it, we get these cocoa beans. And of course, if you are talking of the leading producers of cocoa in the world, they are mostly in West Africa, precisely Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. And we are going to give a brief background of the global cocoa supply chain, and it starts from mostly from the farmer, and it ends with the end user, or maybe the consumer. Now, the global cocoa supply chain is very complex because it involves many participants and many processes. And of course, there are also many key stakeholders, from the farmer to the license buying companies, to the manufacturers, the retailers, and the consumers. And along this complex cocoa supply chain, there are so many sustainability issues, from environmental to social to economic. And I'm going to touch mostly on the social and the environmental. Then we lay much emphasis on the carbon emissions. If you look at these pictures, there are issues of deforestation in the cocoa supply chain, where most farmers cut down trees before they plant the cocoa. It has serious implications for carbon emissions. We can talk of the issue of transporting the cocoa beans, whether within the country or outside the country through shipping. There are also carbon issues there. Then we can talk of one recent phenomenon where the cocoa farmers cut down the cocoa trees and use it for illegal mining, where they destroy the water bodies, they destroy land. Then coming back to some of the social issues, we have issues of child labor, where instead of kids to go to school, they are involved in the cocoa supply chain. Then again, there are issues of corruption and fraud, where some of the purchasing clerks adjust the weighing scales so that they can cheat the farmers. And all these are issues that are very persistent in the global cocoa supply chain. And to resolve some of these issues, I think the EU launched the Sustainable Cocoa Initiative in 2020, just to address some of these challenges. And we can also mention the LKSG, that is the Due Diligence Act. And my friend Sarah, we have looked at how the Due Diligence Act in Germany can address some of these cocoa sustainability issues. Now, what are some of the specific carbon emissions issues in the cocoa supply chain? I think my previous speakers have addressed some of the broader issues of carbon emissions, and I'm going to be very specific on some of the issues within the cocoa supply chain. Like I mentioned earlier, the cutting down of trees to grow cocoa, that's the deforestation, releasing some stored carbon from the trees into the atmosphere. Then we have what we call the traditional slash and burn method, where they have to cut down all economic trees to make way for cocoa farming. Is also another source of carbon emission. Then we have application of fertilizers, and some of them contain some greenhouse gases like the nitrous oxide, also into the atmosphere. We can talk of overtilling of the land, or soil management practices. All these are part of the carbon emission issues in the cocoa supply chain. Then when we talk of the transportation, like I mentioned, the heavy fuel vessels that transport the cocoa beans from the producing areas to where they are transformed into chocolate, all these also add up to the carbon footprint. Then we can talk of disposal of the packaging materials. All these add to the carbon footprint in the cocoa supply chain. Now the question is, how can we use blockchain to address some of these challenges? Then, like we said, my co-speakers, Duan also mentioned an issue of trust. Now, blockchain can offer very transparent and verifiable way to record the carbon emissions of all these people. Specifically, we can zero in on some specific blockchain features and how they can help. And we can say that the immutable record of blockchain ensures that we can kind of track the emission record of these farmers. And for example, we can look at it from the machinery, the kind of emissions that they use for some of the machines that they use, like tractors and the harvesters in the farm. We can record the fuel consumption that they use on the blockchain ledger, and that can be very important. We can also mention the smart contract, and I think my brother Abdallah mentioned it, how we can use the smart contract to incentivize the farmers who reduce their carbon emissions, and that one is possible. We can also use for real-time monitoring, where the stakeholders can access the real-time data on the carbon emissions of these farmers. Then we can also mention the tokenization of the carbon credit, where farmers can earn tokens for reducing emissions, which can be traded or sold. Then, of course, security issues, where the blockchain can ensure the secure storage of the sensitive data for all the farm operations. Now, here we are going to answer the question, do the supply chain participants trust the blockchain to address these environmental and social issues that we have discussed? And again, we mentioned mistrust in the supply chain. Would blockchain substitute for the lack of relation trust in the cocoa supply chain? And this is a study that myself and Prof. Sakis and Prof. Chongwan have started to investigate, and we have some to show. Now, in that study, what we did was that we proposed what we call the trust substitution theory, which suggests that if the supply chain does not have relational trust, then we have to invest in resources, the tools like the blockchain to help monitor and build trust into the supply chain. And we built this study on the UTAUT theory. Now, this study was carried in the Ghana's cocoa supply chain, specifically from Ghana, and this figures show how important the cocoa supply chain is very important to Ghana. Now, here we use two sets of respondents: the smallholder cocoa farmers. Then we also looked at the license buying companies. So the smallholder cocoa farmers are very important because they own over 80% of the farmlands, especially in Ghana, and they are involved in harvesting, breaking, and the drying of cocoa beans. Now, this study was also informed by a United Nations study in Ghana, where they were looking for the best way to implement blockchain technology in Ghana's cocoa supply chain. So this study was a kind of a lead to see how best we can answer some of the questions. Now, let me share some of the interesting findings. Before that, let me touch on the samples. I will use 450 smallholder cocoa farmers and 300 purchasing clerks, those that buy the cocoa from the smallholder farmers for the study. Now, let me show some of the results that we had. And this is the summary of results from both the farmers and for the purchasing clerks. But the one that we are more interested is whether or not blockchain could substitute for the lack of relational trust in the supply chain. And with that, we use what we call the Edward-Pareto substitutability index to calculate for that. And that's just that if the interaction effect is less than 0, then there is substitution. If it is greater than 0, then there is complement. And that is what we use to establish our substitution effect. There's a reference made by Chika and Baki, who also made that suggestion. Now, what are some of the results that we had? Let me jump to the result. Now, the result that we had, we looked at the direct effect of the UTHC variables on the intention to adopt blockchain. But the most interesting one that I want us to discuss is whether or not blockchain could substitute for the lack of relational trust in the supply chain. And our results suggested that blockchain relational trust negatively moderated the trust in supply chain and behavioral intention in both cases. That is the smallholder cocoa farmers and the license buying companies. That thought that indeed blockchain could substitute for the lack of relational trust in the cocoa supply chain. And this supports previous theoretical and conceptual studies whether or not blockchain would substitute for trust or it complements trust. And to the best of our knowledge, this forms one of the earliest empirical studies to confirm the trust substitution effects of blockchain technology. Of course, we made some theoretical and practical contributions to the study. And theoretically, I've mentioned of how we try to argue for the trust substitution theory, where we think that if supply chain lacks relational trust, it will make participants invest in blockchain to signal the trust. And we can also say that the high levels of blockchain can have positive effect on the behavioral intention by compensating for the weak trust in supply chain, or the strong trust in supply chain can compensate for the effect of the low blockchain relational trust. And practically, we think that there are different adoption behaviors because we found that the locals, the smallholder farmers' adoption behavior is different from that of the licensed purchasing company. And that also goes to the issue of expectations, because we feel that the smallholder farmers may have low expectations. Now, of course, we discussed some limitations of the study, and we found that the Edward-Pareto substitutability does not really give perfect substitutes, even though it can prove substitution to some effects. Then we also think that the cross-sectional data may be a weakness, and we can look at how can we perform an experiment to really confirm whether or not that thing exists in the cocoa supply chain. Then, of course, we also consider two actors in the cocoa supply chain: the smallholder cocoa farmers, and of course, the purchasing clerks. We can expand it to involve government agencies. So what we want to do maybe X, where we can look at other econometric models, where we can look at other econometric models, where we can look at other econometric models, where we can look at
Hello,
Matthew.
where we can.
Matthew,
Yes, Joe.
you're looping somehow.
Yes, can you hear me now? All right, thank you. I think I'm even at the end, so this is for future studies. Then I want to show some pictures of how we got the data from the smallholder cocoa farmers, where we met them in a church. We explained them how blockchain works. Then they also had the chance to ask questions. And for some of them, after going through this one, we gave the questionnaire to them to fill. Then fortunately, some of them said they had not tasted chocolate before, and they are aware that their cocoa is used for making chocolate. Then we had to provide some of them with some chocolate to taste. And I think that is how we went about our study. In fact, we played a video of how the blockchain works to them, and it was translated to a local language. So to a larger extent, they understood the whole thing before the data collection started. Thank you, Joe. I think I'll end here. If there are any questions, I'll come back again. Thank you very much.